Cloud. All righty. Thank you so much, Emilea, for joining us. I'm very, very excited to have this chat with you today. And there were a lot of students that were very eager to be able to talk to you too. Because of some time stuff, it was just really hard for us to figure out where, at what time could students join us. And so you may notice that people pop in and out, and that's okay. A couple of announcements before I pass it on to you, or just reminders for folks. First is that don't forget that for CED students, don't forget that we have the community clothing exchange at the Vacc. So feel free to pop in if you need anything, want anything, just want to take a look at what we have, or maybe you have some clothing that you would like for someone else to have. Feel free to drop it off. And don't forget the refueling station. Maybe you forgot a snack. Maybe you didn't bring lunch and need something to eat before class or bring into class. Feel free to pass by. It'll be at the end of the Vacc where the big windows are at. It is a take what you need, bring what you can. So same as the clothing aspect of things. Today, I'm really excited to have Emilea with us. And before we jump into talk to her, I wanted to share, so next time, on March the 29th, already next week, we will also have Dr. Tasha Vacc doing an Ask Me Anything, because it seems like this woman just does it all too. And so looking forward to seeing you all there. And just to give you a heads up on what also is coming, we're going to be interviewing Dr. Camila Pulgar. She'll be talking about suicide prevention. And then I believe our last chat at the Vacc will be on April the 15th with Carolina Guisar, a dietitian that we will be talking about nutrition and mental health. And I'm sorry, you're going to probably hear my birds in the background. All righty. So with that, I am going to pass it on to you. Emilea, can you tell us who are you? What do you do?
Yes. So I am Emilea Gross. I primarily am a high school counselor at Northwest High School here in Guilford County. And I also do some private practice work with Three Birds Counseling in the evenings. I started out as an elementary school counselor my first year, and then transitioned to high school. So I have a little bit of experience in a couple of levels, and just excited to share with you guys and answer your questions, and just let you know a little bit about what the real world of school counseling is like.
Thank you so much. And we can go ahead and jump into some of the questions. I know Liz is joining us today. You said you're in South Carolina right now?
Yes. Hi, I'm Liz. I graduated from the program in 2020. I'm currently based in Columbia, South Carolina. I'm a middle school counselor at Hammond School, and I am actually looking to relocate back to the Greensboro High Point area. I just missed a lot. That's where I feel like my people are. And wow, the last 2 years in a school have been amazing in so many ways. Some of the challenges have made me wonder, is private practice maybe more up my alley? It's kind of been in the back of my head as a professional goal of licensure down the road, and really interested in learning about that, the supervision process. And so I kind of have this ongoing battle of, do I dive full in and leave the school system and just jump into private practice work, doing clinical stuff, or stick with school because I it's kind of what I know, or find this happy marriage of both. And Melissa, will you please introduce your bird, because
No, it's probably so distracting. So this is Remy. Remy is just so used to me being in this space, so that whenever he sees me like already starting to speak to the screen, he knows I'm gonna be here for a while. So he just jumps from his cage too. This is Remy.
Well, so I get, that's just a little bit about me. Where I'm at in my process, I have the application open for licensure, and I've been staring at it for about a year. And I took the NCE already. I have 2 letters of recommendation secured, and so I guess I'd love to hear about. I am very curious about your day-to-day now, and what that looks like, but also very practically and selfishly for me, and anybody who's looking ahead to the licensure process, just that daunting application. If you remember how you got through it, any tips and tricks and advice about that?
Yeah. So for me, being in the school, like I hear what you're saying. Do I jump full in and go private practice? Do I stay with what I know? And I often have that question because I do love the private practice work that I do so much. But for me, having the balance of both, it's like the best of both worlds. Like I do love what I do in the schools, and you see a different clientele, right? You would not see in private practice. So I enjoy that. So school is it's almost like a safety net for me. And then the private practice work is more like dabbling in the fun stuff that I learned in grad school and get to use my skills and things like that. Um, I totally hear you about having the licensure application open for a year. I just got an email that I need to renew mine, and it's it's always a process. But the biggest thing for the licensure application that I would recommend is making copies of absolutely everything before you send it off. So just taking your time, getting everything together. And then just keeping a copy of everything. Our North Carolina board is notorious for not keeping track of things very well. And so having that copies of everything just makes things easier. It also makes things easier because once you go from LCMHC-A to an LCMHC without the A, you have to resubmit a lot of that stuff again. And so if you keep a copy of it, it just makes your life a little bit easier. So definitely with that, I'm glad you've got the NCE under your belt, because that's another big challenge. But yeah, I mean, for me, I did a lot of my supervision hours in the school. I actually didn't start private practice work until probably my second or third year in the schools. And so I was just getting all my supervision hours through my school sessions with my students. So it was a really nice way. I went nice and slow. I think it took me 4 years to get my full license, and then I was able to use it in private practice after that.
So you got all of your hours within the school before
Mhm.
even branching
Mhm.
out.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. What does that look like on a day-to-day, like when you're meeting with kids? Because in the school, it's often just a 15-minute check-in. Occasionally you'll get a full 40, 45, maybe 50 minutes, or the occasional hour and a half crisis response. Just timing wise and logistically, do you record? Do you get permission from everybody? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I mean, a little bit of it depends on your supervisor, right? And what they expect of you and what they know of you too. My supervisor happened to be a professor that I was in grad school with, and so she knew a lot of my work. So I didn't have to record everything. I would record a session here or there to submit like every 2 weeks or so. And like I said, I went nice and slow. So I just did supervision every 2 weeks. And I would record a 15-minute session. And so it is sending out a lot of requests for recording to parents. And most of them are really understanding. A couple are not, and that's fine. But my conversations were more with the students about recording, because they were typically the ones more uneasy about the recording than the parents were. So yeah, I would record a 15-minute check-in, and there's a lot of things can be accomplished in 15 minutes. And then if I happen to have a recording or happen to have a release to record in a crisis situation, I would record that as well, but those were very few and far between. But your direct hours, they don't all have to be recorded. So anytime you're meeting with a student, you can count that as a direct hour, even though you're not recording it. So, and you probably spend a significant amount of your time with students. So, like I said, every 2 weeks I counted 40 hours of direct time with students. So like 20 hours a week of direct time with students. And I would have a 15-minute recording or longer for each of my supervision sessions. And sometimes I would get to supervision and I would not have a recording, and because it was just one of those crazy couple of weeks. And like I said, that's kind of dependent on your supervisor. My supervisor was very familiar with my work, and so we would kind of talk about some other tapes or talk about some situations that I couldn't record at that time. So yeah.
It's very just reassuring and validating to hear your perspective of somebody who's done it, been doing it. In the beginning process, any regrets you have or things you wish you did differently right off the bat?
I don't think so. I did get very, I was itching to get my full license towards the end, right after my, it had been 4 years. And so at times I was like, gosh, I wish I had met weekly, or I wish I had, because you take the summers off too, because you're not meeting with students during the summers and things like that. And sometimes I was like, gosh, I wish I would have just fast tracked things a little bit more. The biggest thing that I wish I had done that I did not is to plan to complete your licensure, your supervision hours on a 2-year mark. So I was right after my 4 years. So I was like, I had just renewed my LCMHCA. And then like 2 months later, I applied for my full LCMHC. So, I mean, all that really means is 2 full applications within a couple months of each year of each other, 2 full payments to the licensing board. And so if I had gotten my supervision hours just a couple months earlier, I could have just submitted for my full licensure instead of renewing my associate and then applying for my full license. So I would just recommend, if you're going to do it in 2 years, that's super ambitious of you, and go for it. More power to you. But I would recommend like trying to get it like right under 4 years so that you don't have to do 2 applications within a couple months of each other, because that was a little bit of a pain.
Okay, I see what you mean. So either like really fast tracking and getting it within 2, or taking your time and timing it with the 4-year mark.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, if you get it in 3, like that's fine. You're a year apart. It was a frustrating process for me, because I was like, I just submitted this application to renew my license, and now I'm resubmitting it to get my full licensure. So, just the timing of that.
Okay, got it. I'm curious about, now that after you got your full licensure, well, I guess we say full licensure. That means dropping the A.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you mean? Okay.
Yep.
Is that when you started working at Three Birds, or went to the clinical setting? How did you change your role within the school?
Yeah, so I started at Three Birds probably a year before I got my full license. And so that was nice, because I was able to get some of those full 50-minute sessions in for supervision. And it was also nice being able to have supervision around those private practice hours too. I wasn't diving into private practice and not that you ever have no supervision, but I wasn't diving into private practice with my full license and kind of on my own. So I did have about a year, and in that last year, I think I was meeting just about weekly to finish up my hours, because I was meeting with clients more frequently too. And my needs were a little bit higher, just adjusting to the new setting. So, I mean, my role as a school counselor didn't really change. I still did all my work in the school, and then I started with like 2 clients a week. I have like 5 clients a week now, which is probably one more than I would like, but you know, boundaries. So, yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed having that last year in private practice and receiving supervision around that at the same time, because you don't have to have your full license to go into private practice. Yeah, so.
Okay, awesome. That's really good to know. So you mentioned that you have 5 right now, and that's maybe a little bit more than you want to take on. Would your ideal like hourly breakdown look like, or the balance of, do you spend 75% of your time school counseling and then like 25 with 3 birds? What does that look like? Is it
Yeah.
are you still full time in the school and this is additional?
Yes, so I'm a full-time in the schools. And then Tuesday and Thursday evenings, I have 2 or 3 clients a night. So ideally, I would like no more than 2 clients on Tuesdays and Thursday nights. And then, things ebb and flow in private practice too. Like one of my clients just dropped back to once a month. And one of my clients was every other week, and now she's needing weekly. So it sort of ebbs and flows with how often or how many clients I have in a week. There was one point that I was having 5 clients one week, and the next week I had 1, just because of their every other week or whatever it may be. So I do prefer, in a perfect world, I would have no more than two nights a week. And because it's not only just the FaceTime you have with the client, it's writing the notes and looking and doing some research and kind of supervision around their needs and things like that too. So yeah.
I think the last question I have right now is there a process? Have you ever done any self-referral or seen your students outside of the school setting? I'm curious about that.
So Guilford County Schools has a non-compete. I don't know if it's actually called a non-compete, but basically it is my job as a school counselor to serve my students in the school setting. So I cannot have them come to me and pay for my services outside of the school, because I should be providing those services in school. And obviously we know that school counseling and private practice is a lot different, but they expect me to be meeting those needs in the school. So I do not see any students from my high school in my private practice. Now I refer lots of my high school students to the other counselors at Three Birds. I have several that see the other counselors at Three Birds. And I have a referral list just to lots of practitioners in the area. But I have had students request to see me outside of school, and I just have to tell them that, unfortunately, I can't do that. But obviously, in a school setting, we don't have 50 minutes once a week to meet with the same student. So, it's a little bit of a catch-22, but I've not really run into too many issues with that. So yeah.
Thank you. I feel so lucky. I feel like this is a private interview.
Oh, awesome.
Unless I turn it back over to you. I'm sure there's other questions that you have.
Liz, you're asking so many of the questions that had been coming up for some of the students too. So thank you so much for asking them. Like a lot of students were curious to know, okay, what does the balancing both private practice and school counseling look like for you? A couple of students had asked about like what the process of licensure looked like for you as well. There were a couple of things. Let me bring up the questions really quick. that you kind of touched on that I would love to hear more about? And Liz, I see that you unmuted yourself. Do you have like a follow-up question?
Had a quick one.
Go
Because
ahead.
we're going to look through questions. Did you apply for licensure upon graduating or delayed a little?
I did. I applied. I started the application about a month before, or a couple weeks before graduating. I was getting everything together, and that is one of the things that I am so grateful that I did. Just because they need course descriptions and your syllabus and all kinds of things like that, and so being still in the program right before graduating and being able to pull all of those things together, I feel like made things so much easier for me. So I mean, I know you're not in the program right now, but for those of you that do tune in and watch, like, I would highly recommend go ahead. And even like I said, I didn't use my license for about 3 years. Even if you're not planning to use it right now, it's just a really good thing to have in your back pocket.
You're putting that towards your hours, like direct
Yes.
hours in licensure too. So that's another
Exactly.
thought, which was interesting because that's one of the questions that came up. How would you suggest preparing to becoming a school counselor as a first year master's students? What we can do now to be better equipped, which is exactly what you're naming.
Yeah. I mean, and just being a school counselor in general, it sounds like is part of that question. Like,
Mhm.
it's the program. UNCG is amazing. I would never trade a day at UNCG in that program for anything, but there's just so much boots on the ground stuff that UNCG can't, or any program can't give you, because every school district's a little bit different. Every school's a little bit different. The politics of schools are different. So a lot of it is just knowing. I think your internship and your practicum are really, really important places to gain some of that experience and some of that knowledge. But sort of my philosophy was, my first year, I'm going to kind of put my nose down and do whatever's asked of me and kind of figure out how to navigate. What does my principal expect of me? What do my coworkers expect of me? What is my role as a school counselor here? Because, like Liz, I'm sure your role as a school counselor is very different than my role as a school counselor, is different than the high school right down the street from me. So I think that's the difficult part about being in a school counseling program, is that you just can't be prepared for exactly the nuances of the job.
Do you feel like you got a little bit of that exposure when you did your internship during your master's?
Absolutely. Yeah. I did my internship in an elementary school, because that's where I started and that's where I wanted to be forever. And obviously that's not what happened. So I felt like I really had a grasp on elementary school, and when I moved to high school, it was terrifying, because it was that, what are the expectations? Most elementary school counselors are on their own, and most high school counselors are working with a team. And so it was kind of navigating the differences between that too. So yes, my internship definitely gave me a lot of firsthand experience. And I shouldn't say that I was in an elementary school. I was actually in a 3rd through 12th grade for my internship, but I primarily worked with the elementary school students in that setting. But yes, absolutely soak in everything you can from your internship, and just be as flexible as possible. I mean, the program in UNCG teaches you those skills, counseling skills, and those are invaluable. Like, you're gonna use those no matter what. Even if you finish the program and you don't even go into school counseling, those skills are absolutely invaluable to you. But the nuances of being a school counselor itself are
Mhm. Which that
definitely.
brings me to the next question. And this is kind of like connected to both school counseling, but also I can see how we can translate to private practice as well. So the question was, what advice do you have for switching between school levels or for entering at a different level than your first preference? Um, what was the most important thing you learned on the job that you didn't know about in school? Okay. And there was a follow-up question of like, and similarly, like that transition between school counseling and private practice. So you can go however, I know you can go so many different ways with that question.
So I'll start with switching between levels because I definitely have experience with that. Like I said, I started elementary. My heart was elementary. That's where I knew that I was going to be for my career. And there are pros and cons to each level. The politics of the school that I started at in an elementary school were not conducive to school counseling.
Mm,
I was primarily a guidance teacher. I taught 28 lessons a week, which is an absurd amount of lessons to teach a week, 45-minute lessons.
wow.
And
Wow.
then I had one day that was dedicated to intervention support, which is basically educational interventions. And I was the leader of that team to get the teachers together and talk about interventions to make these kids academically successful. So even through that, though I wasn't teaching that day, I wasn't doing much counseling. There were several instances where students were in crisis and my principal would say, well, you need to finish your lesson first, and then you can go meet with the student. Or, there was an instance with a child protective service case, and my principal's like, that's not your role. You don't call CPS. My placement in the elementary school was not what I wanted to be a school counselor. I did a lot of advocacy around like, hey, I'll teach every other week. Like I'll do 14 lessons a week, or I'll do 28 lessons one week and none the next week. But these students are in need of a counselor, and they're not getting access to one. So I did do a lot of advocacy around that, a lot of time tracking, and kind of showing the principal my time logs and what I was actually spending my time doing. You guys in school counseling learn about the Ask a National model, and that is the gold standard. And I would venture to say that 90% of schools aren't adhering to the Ask a National model like we would like them to, or like we would like to. But even advocating to get closer to more direct services with students. And my principal would argue, well, you're giving direct services, you're in front of the students teaching lessons. And so just that's ultimately why I ended up leaving the elementary school setting, was because it was not a good fit. And so when I chose to switch levels, actually, I don't even think I was looking to switch levels. I think I was looking for another elementary school that maybe in my interview, I was going to be more aware and ask more questions about how much guidance time was expected of me. And I got.
Sorry to interrupt, Emily. A quick question.
Yeah.
Were you able to count any of those hours towards like as direct hours?
Yes.
Like in a classroom setting with students?
Yes. Technically, classroom guidance is direct hours towards licensure because you are working directly with the students. So that there was that benefit. That was nice. And I did set up a lot of my lessons so they were more small group type lessons where I could, in a 45-minute lesson, I could spend 10 minutes with each group. So, I tried to work with what I had, but it was a very difficult situation.
Mhm.
Um, so when I was looking for other schools, I was primarily looking for elementary schools, and I got an interview at the high school I'm at now, which happens to be 5 minutes from my house. It has a very good reputation for their school counseling program, and so I took the interview sort of in the back of my head thinking like, there's not a chance I can't go to high school. Like, I don't like teenagers. And so, I had the interview, and the interview was, I mean, it was amazing just hearing the way that they got to interact with students that I was not. Um, and so, obviously I took the job, and that's where I've been. And I can't imagine myself anywhere else. I can't imagine myself back in an elementary school. And sort of the difference is, I mean, in an elementary school, you are alone. So you have the autonomy to run your own program and make it look however you want to make it look, which is sort of exciting and enticing, but also you're alone. And so, if you're advocating for yourself and you're getting a lot of pushback from your principal, it's just you and your principal. Whereas in a high school, yes, you're with a team. So sometimes you have to bend and do things that the team wants to do. But when you're advocating, your department is advocating for the counseling program. And it just has a lot more weight, it seems, to be able to get things accomplished. You have more people to rely on. And so I've never done middle school. I don't I don't know how people do middle school is. But yeah, I imagine there's different pros and cons to middle school as well. Um, and then switching to private practice too, you mentioned that also, Melissa. Um, Again, there was never really a switch for me. It was sort of just an add-on. And in school counseling, like Liz and I were speaking about, you do just have like 15-minute sessions here or quick check-ins, or sometimes you have an hour and a half crisis session, and and little follow-up, right? Like it's definitely not as consistent as private practice work is. It's also a lot of solution focused. Like I do a lot of like solution focused brief therapy with my students. Like, how am I going to get you back to class to be successful in school? Like, you're having a panic attack right now. What quick things can we work through to get you back to class? Sometimes I feel like it's a Band-Aid. And so we can't really dive in as much in the school setting. So I was missing that piece. I was missing those clinical skills that I learned at UNCG, wanting to do more with that in private practice. And so I started with 3 birds and picked up a couple of clients in the evenings. And for me, it's really the perfect balance of getting to dive in and use those clinical skills, but also getting to see students on a day-to-day basis in a way that you don't get to see them in private practice.
Mhm.
I don't know if I answered all parts of that question.
I think you did a beautiful job. There was a student that had asked me about like going about that switch of like doing more of a solution focus type framework or lens, and then switching to however that would look like for private practice. And I don't know, how different does it look like for you when you see a client at school or when you see a client at Three Birds?
Yeah, I mean, it is a switch. It is a shift. It's almost like putting on a different hat.
Mhm.
And it was a challenge for me at first, because I would start my sessions with clients, and 15 minutes into my private practice session, I'm like, okay, I'm feeling like we can wrap this up. And it's like, oh, wait, we have 30 more minutes we can talk. So it's definitely a shift. And for me, it was a lot of just confidence building and reminding myself that I knew how to do 50-minute sessions from being in the Vacc clinic. So just building my confidence, reminding myself of those skills, going back to the basics, reflections, and I mean, not even going really back into much theory, but just going back to reflecting and those skills, those basic counseling skills, and reminding myself that that's okay. Whereas sometimes in a school, I might not reflect something back so that we can wrap this up quickly so you can get back to your test that you're in the middle of or something. So it's definitely a shift. The shift comes much more natural to me now. I mean, I think I've been at Three Birds 3 years. So it's a much more natural shift to me. Also, I've had most of my clients for quite a while now, so that helps as well. But yeah, getting used to that is difficult at first, but it's definitely doable. And it definitely, like I've said, meets different needs for me. So yeah.
Thank you.
I have to hop off, but I just want to thank you so much for your time and for your wisdom.
Yeah.
And I'm really grateful that this was an opportunity that I got to be a part of this morning. So
Awesome. It was great to meet you.
great to meet you
And
too.
good luck.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Liz.
Bye.
Bye. All righty, let's see. So many great questions. It's hard to kind of figure out which one to go with. So one of the questions we kind of covered, like, what does a typical week look like for you? And you kind of talked about like switching between school and private practice. One of the questions that came up was, can you speak on your experience of being a parent and being a school counselor / private, like working at private practice?
Yes, definitely. So I am a relatively new parent. My daughter's 19 months old. So, and I'm about to have twins. So, it is, it is a challenge balancing, having children. And the thing that I keep going back to is boundaries, 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 which has been a challenge. And I would say, I mean, hopefully I'm not over speaking for anybody popping on, but most new counselors have trouble with boundaries. I mean, it's a difficult thing starting a new job, putting boundaries into place. So definitely for my first couple of years, like I think I alluded to before, I kind of put my nose down and I did whatever was asked of me. And I didn't put a lot of boundaries in place. The trouble with that is it makes it more difficult to then put boundaries in place because you haven't had any to begin with. So, finding a balance of making sure that you are spending the time that you want with your family, and balancing that with your career. And really, I think it's priorities for each individual person. There have been weeks that have been really exhausting for me because as a high school counselor, and I didn't do it as much as an elementary, but as a high school counselor, probably once a month, we have an evening event at school that we invite parents to. And so with my Tuesdays and Thursdays being dedicated to private practice, that basically leaves Mondays and Wednesdays because nobody likes to do things on Friday evenings at the school. But it leaves Mondays and Wednesdays. And so some weeks I have an event at school on Monday and 2 clients on Tuesday and 3 clients on Thursday. And I feel like I haven't given my family any time. So I've gotten to a point where I'm able to say like, hey, I can do this event this month, but I can't do this event this month. Or looking ahead in my schedule and saying like, oh, this happens to be a week I only have 1 client this week. And so absolutely, I can help spearhead this event. And same thing with the regular hours of a school counselor. You guys will probably find that schools are going to use you as much as they can. And they'll expect you to be there an hour before school starts and stay an hour late. And, oh, hey, this parent needs to talk to you as you're walking out the door, and things like that. So for me, it's been the easiest boundary I've been able to put up is to say my hours are from 9 to 4:30, and those are the work hours of any other staff member, and those are my work hours.
Mhm.
I'm not gonna come in early, and I'm not gonna stay late. What I get done during the day is what I get done. So that's been really important for me. But really, I think the nicest thing for me is that I did put my nose to the ground those first couple of years when I didn't have kids. And I was able to build up some rapport. I was, my reputation was not that I was someone who was just going to skip out, and and not a lot of times when you put up a boundary, that's how people view you, unfortunately. But my principal and my coworkers know that my family comes first. And so I think, making that very clear is important.
Awesome. I have another question about boundaries, but student related. But before we kind of step away from you as an individual as well, one of the questions that came up was like, can you talk a little bit more on personal identities and how they come up in both settings? Yes, whatever identities would mean for you.
Yes. So that's a really tough one, and was and is still for me something that I struggle with. So I'm a queer woman. And in private practice, I feel much more open to express that or be who I am. I feel like you're seeking services from me. So what you're getting into. So private practice, I have not had much of an issue being myself. In the school setting, it's been a journey to be able to figure out whether I'm able to be myself or whether I just have to be this straight white female school counselor. So when I started in the elementary school, I didn't put any pictures up of my family. I didn't talk to my students about myself personally. And if you guys know elementary school kids, they want to know absolutely everything about you. So it was a challenge. And, my elementary school, they did like a trunk or treat. I did not bring my wife with me to the trunk or treat. I was very closed off about who I was, just for fear of, just for fear of, I don't know, the parents would be upset. They don't want their child around a queer counselor. What does that mean? And what does that mean with HR? And so lots of questions that I just kind of wrestled with. I was also probably wrestling with my identity in general, like growing into my identity in general when I started in school counseling. And so navigating that in the elementary school, it was hard for me, not feeling like I could show up as who I was. We're also taught very early on at UNCG that self-disclosure is kind of like, well, that's not something we should do. There's a time and a place for self-disclosure. And so that was something I kind of leaned on. I was like, well, I'm not supposed to self-disclose. It's okay. Right. And it was kind of a crutch for me. And so, my coworkers, I opened up to them a little bit about my family, but not even all of my coworkers. So it was very difficult showing up, my identity showing up in the elementary school. And I do regret that. I definitely regret not being able to be my full self, just thinking of what I could have offered the kids if I had been my authentic self.
Safety, like as a whole,
Exactly.
you didn't feel safe in that environment, and
Right.
just with what little bit I've been able to hear in the past couple of minutes, makes a lot of sense too.
Yes. Yeah. And so when I went to the high school setting, I was like, okay, well, high school students, it's okay to expose being queer to high school students, right? Like, all of these messages I kind of justified in my head, but even even my first year at the high school, I was very guarded. I didn't want, I don't know if any of you guys know anything about Northwest, but it is a rural, high socioeconomic, conservative area that the high school is in. So I didn't want parents to be in an uproar that their child's school counselor is queer, and so I was very guarded my first year in the high school, and I think it even took a few months before my fellow counselors, before I told my fellow counselors. And then little by little, I started putting some pictures of my wife up. And I remember it was either the end of my first year, beginning of my second year, a student came into my office and she was struggling with coming out to her family. And my pictures that I put in my office were sort of discreetly, like, you would have had to look for them to find them. And she saw the picture of my wife and I, and we were holding hands in the picture, and she asked me about it. And it was a really, I'm getting chills talking about it. It was a really,
so emotional.
yeah, it was a really profound moment, to be able to share that part of myself with her who was going through something similar. And so sort of from that point on, I was like, you know what, it's better for me to be who I am, and damn the parents that want to call and complain. And there are, right? There are parents that call and don't want me to see their student. And it just kind of is what it is. Anytime you don't fit whatever the parent's perfect identity is for their child. So, I would encourage all of you guys to show up fully in your role, because you bring something that nobody else can bring to that student or to that relationship. And so it took me a while to get there. And some of my colleagues at the high school are also queer, and having conversations with them sort of helped as well. But I do feel at this point I'm able to be my full authentic self in the setting, and I've been there 5 years, and thankfully I feel comfortable enough to do that. But it's definitely been a journey. Yeah.
It brings me so much joy, Emilea, to hear where you are now, like in terms of being able to show up as fully as you would want to in a space like this. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
I am confident a lot of students are going to really appreciate hearing that from you as well. So thank you. I'm going to make a little bit of a transition. Or maybe not so much. One of the questions was, what are some of the most common presenting concerns that students bring to you? And I kind of have, and it's going to make it a little bit loaded, but it's connected to it. I know we specialize on eating disorders at 3 Birds, and I also know you have extensive experience with individuals that have ADHD. So also adding that into that, like how often do you see those two coming up? But then also, like, what are the most common presenting concerns that you see coming in to schools counseling?
Yeah, so for me in school counseling, especially this year, it's been anxiety. And probably over the course of the 5 years that's been the case, just testing anxiety, or just having a panic attack, or anxiety about grades, or something that happened over the weekend with their boyfriend or girlfriend, or it's a social friend group, or things like that. That's probably the most common that I deal with, is just general anxiety. There's been a significant uptick in suicidality this year, which speaks to the climate of the world, I think, but significant uptick in sort of severe crisis cases. We always sort of have some suicidality things that come up, but the severity of them has definitely increased this year. And then, so there's 6 counselors at my high school. And as Melissa mentioned, I do eating disorder work at Three Birds, and one of my passions is kids with ADHD, students with ADHD. And so amongst the 6 of us, typically if another counselor gets a student that has concerns about an eating disorder or concerns with ADHD, they will either refer the student to me. We're broken down by last name, so our students in last name come see each counselor. So they'll send those students to me, or they'll just sort of consult with me and go back to the student. So I would say that there's, amongst the 6 of us, there's probably a handful of eating disorder cases. We do have a lot of students with ADHD. And we see most of those students show up through 504s, which I don't know that UNCG addresses 504s. That's a nasty term in the school counseling world. It's not a school counseling responsibility, but it's one that we do. So
those that don't know what a 504 is, could you?
Yes. So a 504 is it's a law through the Office of Civil Rights, and basically it is a protection against being discriminated against for disability. So really what it was originally intended for is a student that's blind can't be discriminated against because he can't read the words on the page. He's provided an accommodation to have a Braille textbook. So it started out primarily with physical disabilities. And gosh, I guess in the last 10 years or so now, it's shifted into mental disabilities as well, and ADHD. And so it's exploded. 504 has, it's exploded, in my opinion, in a negative way. There are a lot of people that are using 504 to gain advantages over other people, whereas it was initially intended to level the playing field, right? And so, you've got a straight A student who says they have anxiety and they need extra time to take their SAT, for example, because they have anxiety. And so it's like, okay, well, this student was going to make a 1,500 on their SAT, and now they've got double time to take their SAT and they're making a perfect score. So anyway, there's nuances like that with 504s, but now that 504s include mental disabilities, we see a lot of our ADHD students pop up with 504s. And so it's behavioral strategies that we put in place on 504s and things like that. So the other counselors consult me a lot about students with ADHD when doing 504s. But yeah, primarily anxiety, relationship, social, some depression. I mean, it just runs the gamut. You kind of see everything all across the board, but again, definitely anxiety is the most prominent.
Because to be honest, it's helpful to hear, because one of the things that I remember having a conversation with one of the school counseling students was their concern of like, am I spending too much time in other classes that I could be addressing specifically on school counseling classes? And the truth is that you're going to see all of these things. You're going to see students talking about relationships. You're going to see students talking about just all these other addictions. So all of these are going to be important for them to learn about.
And I remember as a school counseling student at UNCG feeling very similarly. I remember at the end of the program, they asked the school counseling cohort how they could improve the school counseling program. And, we came up with several ideas, but ultimately, like, what you're gaining from your classes that are not school counseling related are just as important, if not if not honestly more important than what you're gaining in your school counseling classes, because those school counseling classes are perfect world scenarios. Like they're Ask a National Model, they're things like that, which are great to know and be aware of, but it's like I said, the internship's really where you're going to get the experience of being a school counselor, knowing how to deal with the addictions. I mean, I took the families class, that may be an optional class, but anyway, knowing how to manage a parent or two parents ganging up on their child right in front of you. I mean, it's just, those are the skills that you need from UNCG.
Mhm.
So yeah, I and suicide assessments, those skills, and just, again, how to walk a student through having a panic attack and some anxiety, and those are the skills that are really invaluable. Yeah.
One more question, because I'm aware of time.
Mhm.
One of the questions, we did a really great job in addressing all the questions. So proud of us. It's what does it look like to set realistic, that's the word that stood out to me, realistic goals with students? Do you have any sort of routine that you follow with that? But like, is there realistic goals that you set up? Like, what does that look like? I'm curious myself.
So when I hear that question, it makes me think of my students that are applying to college. And it's like, this student has a 2.5 and wants to apply to Duke. And it's like, oh, okay. So I've gotten better in setting realistic goals over the past 5 years, right? Like your first year, it's, I'll tell a quick little story. My first year, I had a student applying to Cornell, which has like a 6% admission rate. Like it's, and this was a great student. She was top of the class. She had, great test scores. Everything was great. And I was like, you're definitely going to get in. You've got this. You got nothing to worry about. Well, she didn't get in because I mean, they have a 6% admission rate. Right. And so that sort of taught me, and she was a little salty towards me the rest of the year, which I don't blame her. But that sort of taught me like, okay, I've got to give all of my students a dose of reality. I can't be overly optimistic with these students. It's not helpful for them. So setting realistic goals is hard. And I try to use like data when it comes to especially school admissions and school choices. It's a little bit different when we're talking about like anxiety and mental health, but giving them their GPA and giving them their grades and their test scores and saying, all right, now Duke, for example, or UNCG or UNC Wilmington looks for a 3.8 GPA, and your GPA is a 3.5. So it's a little bit of a reach school. It's not that you can't get there, but it's a little bit above your range. Let's also pick a school that's in your range. So, it's a balance. You don't want to crush their dreams. Apply to Duke with your 2.5. Go for it. That's your reach school, but have some schools that you're going to get into, have some safety schools. So that's kind of how I navigate those realistic goals. And then in terms of like mental health, it's similar in providing them or having them consider options, right? Like, oh, my boyfriend just broke up with me. I'm gonna call him and he's gonna take me back right away, right? Or some situation like that, and it's like, okay, well, let's take a step back. What if that doesn't happen? And kind of processing through like more realistically what might happen, or same thing with issues with their parents. A lot of students come in and having fought with their parents, and so not even necessarily goals in that way, but just having realistic expectations of like, well, how could this go differently? And so just helping students frame different options like that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Emilea. And just to kind of finish us up, If you could go back on time, like, what do you think that would be one thing that you would tell yourself as you kind of embark in that journey of school counseling / private practice?
I think going with the flow and being flexible
Absolutely.
is something that, I mean, you just can't get enough of flexibility. Every single day in the school counseling world looks different. And as you guys do your internships, you guys will find that, you know, you've got a plan and you don't get anything done on your plan for the day. So being flexible in that way, but also being flexible in your boundaries and being flexible in, I shouldn't say being flexible in your boundaries, but knowing that you may need to set boundaries you didn't think you might have to. If being ready to advocate for yourself, just being able to stretch and pull yourself in ways that you didn't expect or didn't think that you might have to walking in. And just kind of being open to new possibilities. Like if you are in the school counseling world and it's not fulfilling you, it's not meeting your needs, and you want to tack on some private practice, like definitely go searching for that. Or maybe school counseling is not at all what you thought it was and you want to go full-time private practice. Again, I think just that flexibility is so key. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Appreciate your time, sharing your wisdom and experience with all of us, because I feel like I learned a lot too. We really appreciate you, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. It's beginning to warm up a little bit more out there, so I hope you get to enjoy that.
Yes, awesome.
Oh, one last question that students have been asking. If they have any questions for you, if they would like to reach out to you, what would be the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Probably email. So they can reach me at Emilea@threebirdscounseling.com. Is probably going to be the best way. And I'm happy to answer questions or, you know, help you guys along with anything you may have questions about.
Thank you so much, Emilea.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye.